You may have heard in the news or saw on television that Venice has a big flood, almost as bad as the one from 1996. And a curious thing happened this week, an ironic kind of thing. Before the City Council of Venice was a bill for the budget that included a large portion of money to deal with climate change, especially as it affected Venice. And the scientists have been very clear for many years that it's human beings that are making the problem in Venice. It's bad enough that the water is rising, but the city's sinking. Anyway, so this bill is before the Senate, before the City Council, and there are enough naysayers in the City Council that it was defeated. And no sooner had the vote come down than the waters from the Grand Canal flooded the City Council. Talk about irony. So things didn't go well in Venice. They didn't go well in Santa Clara this week either. 3 more children dead. With the bill sitting on the Senate table, waiting to be passed to do something, but they won't bring it to a vote. 19 Syrians killed this week. And the beat goes on. One trauma after another. And sometimes I just get furious. Other times I get catatonic. I can't do anything. Other times I try to pray, or I turn to Scripture or the tradition to find some way through this morass of trauma that seems to be visited upon us weekly and daily. And you may have experienced trauma in your own life. And we're learning something more about trauma than we knew before. We knew that it existed. We recognized what happens in trauma, especially to soldiers coming back from war. In the First World War, we called it shell shock. In the Second World War, we called it battle fatigue. By the time Vietnam came around, we called it by its name that we know it today, post-traumatic stress syndrome. And this is more than losing something. This is more than grief. This has a whole other feeling and power to it. With loss of family, friends, whatever, we experience grief. And grief can be healed. But what the psychologists and the scientists are telling us is that trauma can't be healed. Something else has to happen to it. It's not only mental, but it's physical. When something, a noise happens or something, persons who have been traumatized live the whole thing all over again. Trauma is never past, it's always present. And it doesn't necessarily have to have happened to you, it could be something that you saw. I can't get near the airport watching those planes come down slowly, 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 without the vision of the Twin Towers. I see them every time. Now, we hear in this morning's scripture the description from Isaiah of a new Jerusalem. He gives us, Isaiah gives us hope that somehow things will be different. And then we get to the gospel. And it all falls apart again. It seems to me that both for Israel and for post-resurrection Jesus community, both were suffering from post-traumatic stress syndrome. This wasn't something that could be healed. They experienced it over and over again. And in 70 AD, down comes the temple again. 20 years before that, Jesus is crucified. They've been following for years. That's trauma. That's not just loss. And Jesus comes to the resurrection and even says to them, this loss is physical as well as mental. Thomas, put your hand in the wound at my side. And in a few weeks, we'll sing that wonderful Advent hymn that has the line in it, those dear tokens of his passion, still his dazzling body bears. The trauma does not go away. And what he's telling us in the gospel this morning is all kinds of things are going to happen to you, but what's important is, first of all, don't listen to all those naysayers out there, and don't listen to all those preachers who promise you that things are going to get better. Those are false prophets. Listen to me. Listen to my words. Listen to what I do. See what I do. And the time will come when you'll get a chance to speak what you need to speak. And you don't have to plan on it at all, because I'll give you the words and the wisdom. And we think, what if I don't get the words? What if I don't know what to say? Well, he already taught us. Father, forgive. They don't know what they're doing. Today you will be with me in paradise. He gives us the words in his life and his action. And then he says to us, but through this all you must endure. See, what the psychologists and the scientists are telling us is that in trauma, we don't get healed. We have to take this new person that we are from the trauma and live a new way. And that takes resilience, and it takes endurance, which is what Jesus is calling us to. In the Christian tradition, we call this illumination. It starts when we're first baptized. We are called infantes, infants, no matter how old we are. And in the early church, before you received communion, you received some honey and bread on your tongue. But Paul says, okay, you've gotten all that, now it's time to grow up. And that takes resilience, and it takes endurance. And that's what Jesus calls us to in this morning's gospel. It sounds terrible stuff, but it's the only way through for you and me. And it's the only way through for the world, as he showed us. So, I want to finish up with your bulletin cover. You're probably wondering, why in heaven's name is the fall of the Berlin Wall on the bulletin? Well, I'll tell you. It's an example of endurance, of resilience. In 1961, we realized, East Germany realized they were losing hundreds of thousands of people crossing into West Germany. They were losing their workers, they were losing their doctors, they were losing their professors, and they had to do something about it, so they decided to build a wall so that people couldn't get out. And it was a horrible time for East Germany and West Germany. Families got separated. Over 800 people were killed, either trying to get over the wall or even get close to the wall. And somewhere around the early 80s, some people got together in St. Nicholas Church in Leipzig. Not St. Thomas Church, where Bach comes from, but in St. Nicholas Church. And they started a Monday evening prayer meeting, a prayer meeting for peace. And they would meet and they would light candles, and then they would go out in the street and they would talk about peace and their longing for peace and justice in Germany and reunification, but it was always peaceful, no violence whatsoever. And this began to grow around Germany, and more churches around the country, around East Germany, and the church became very influential in these prayers of peace and these marches with candles after the Monday night service. At one point, somewhere 30 years ago, a month or so before the wall came down, 320,000 people in Leipzig came out for prayer and candles. And that began a series of incidences and mistakes, it turns out, which is a whole other story. But finally, they opened the door and the wall started coming down. And one of the higher ups in the Communist Party in East Germany, second in command, saw all that had happened and how the floodgates had just opened and the joy that was there. And he said, we had planned for everything, what we were going to do and how we were going to handle all of this, but we didn't plan for candles and prayer. That's what the gospel is calling us for today. That's resilience, that's endurance. Candles and prayer. And whatever else happens after that is what is going to make the world a different place for you and for me. So get your candles out, get your prayer book out. We're going to do another